So I just watched a video by Tooltime called Yes, I Have a Culture Too, and I found that to be a pretty interesting video. Largely the way that Peter was bringing up this question of how important is religion and or religious institutions to community and the sense of community. And the roundabout sort of argument was that you don't have to have some kind of religious affiliation or some sort of religious institution in order to have community. I mean, I think the part that I really agree with is that fundamentally, yes, you can create and institute community through lots of different forms, and that itself is maybe underestimated or underplayed by some of the dogmatic religious folks. Okay, now I agree, Peter, with a lot of the position that was laid out. I think two things that I would want to suggest here. First is that I do think there is a problem with self asserted identity and other attributed identity, that there can be forms of culture that one gets to claim for oneself, and there's other kinds of culture where it's an attribute that others give to you, and the more that you're in a dominant, taken for granted subject position, the less that you can see it as a cultural position. That is, I mean, when you gave the example of having the day off of work on Christmas, well, I mean, having a notion of work and even the notion of Christmas, I mean, you're obviously not a Botswanian bushman, right? There are meta level assumptions about culture that largely come into play only when we step into radically other cultures. Okay, so there really is a problem of how much we're cultural beings through and through, and that can really be revealed to us only by radically other others. And so that's just sort of there's like a backdrop that we can hardly even see. I think the larger point is, and here's the question that I want to sort of throw down as a gauntlet to people, and this is a concern. I think this is a very legitimate concern. It's that when James Carey, famous communication scholar, came to Grand Valley and he spoke, he talked about educational institutions, and so I'll use those as a counter to religious institutions. He said educational institutions have a value to community because they respect history for history's sake, that they value the fact that many, many people have lived before us and have made great contributions that need to be recovered, even if they don't right now have direct market value. See, the problem is, what is going to be the price for ahistorical forms of community? The more that one's community has no roots in the past, the more subject it's going to be to branding, merchandising, and having community created out of product merchandising. The way that capitalism works its fingers into naturalistic atheism is really insidious. I think many people don't realize their quickness to jettison the past becomes this is the handmaiden of the capitalist machine. Corporate the way that identity and community have become inseparable from all of the sort of merchandising and producting and the product creating, I think there really is a great concern over what will be community when people create it. And I think there is, yes, it doesn't need to be artistic and musical and intellectual and filled with possibilities of thought. I think there are ways of creating community. The concern is, how can one safeguard in an economy which is largely that of attention, where not everyone can get equal access because not everyone can be heard? Then it seems like one has to break out and at least turn oneself into a commercial to the extent that one wants to be heard. So there has to be at least that. Given that, how will one ensure that the kinds of communities, now I agree, the church is a sort of exploitative institution that has taken advantage of people's need for community. The question is, what will be those kinds of community which won't be ahistorical or exploitative? And or if they do become ahistorical, won't that just be really just sort of tightly aligned with a kind of identity merchandising, or a sense of an identity that is, I'm not sure where it will be rooted. Could there be something about not any of the religious institutions, but something about the informing spirit of what it means to be an organism that has emerged into self awareness? What could be universally understood celebrations? Things like the rising of the sun, its setting, the fact of death, the fact of birth. There seem to be universal rituals, and they need a depth. We need stories and narratives that help us give meaning to fundamental facts about our lives, and they can serve as elements of community for people. But I don't think that we can do this without some recognition that there are, I guess, there are reasons to hold on to a history that safeguards against some of the commercializing. I think the question is, what are the viable kinds of community that are pruned from the religious dogma but don't just become subject to the corporate capitalist machine? Okay, thanks.